Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi Achint. I have with me Professor Gautam Sen, who's from the London School of Economics, prolific writer. As a matter of fact, you can find his articles in First Post. I've been in touch with Sir for a little bit, and I he keeps sending me a lot of very good insights with regards to geopolitics and what's happening in the world. So I thought I've been trying to get Sir on the platform to talk about geopolitics now that the entire world is on fire. I think that this is a good time. Professor, thank you so much for having me, for letting me have you on the platform. And, I look forward for this wonderful discussion.
Namaste, Adi. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to join your platform. You have so many outstanding individuals sharing their insights. So let's see where we can go.
So, I'm sure you will be as good as anybody else, or even better, if I may. I wanted to ask you about India today finds itself in a very interesting position in the world. It's neither here nor there. It's a growing power. It's not grown, or it's not, the so-called the third world, as the Westerners put it. And with the world pretty much, as I said, on fire, where do you see India's position in the world?
I think most people, including ourselves, we agree India is at an inflection point. This coming decade, and indeed the next 5 years, will be absolutely critical. If I may put it in a colloquial way, for over 1300 years, we've been on our knees virtually and periodically sought to stand up, say with
Hmm.
Shivaji, and subsequently we tried to stand up. We are now at a point of time where we really can stand up and hold our heads high. And without beating about the bush, this really has been made possible by the efforts of the government of Narendra Modi and his team. These last 10 years have been quite remarkable. Uh, Forget about the politics, just look at the data on every dimension. We are virtually on the verge of a historic transformation after a very, very long time. 2047 remains a bit of a dream, but if we can make it through the next 10 years and hit 7 trillion, maybe a bit more, I think then we are much more secure than we have ever been. What I want to say is that, many discussions are taking place on social media, in newspaper articles, and we have one of the best foreign ministers of any country in India today, His Excellency Sri Jaishankar. We have a terrific NSA. But there are one or two things which, as an academic, I would like to posit to contextualize some of these insights that are available with many people. And excellent. And I've just mentioned to you how much I learned from some of the people who come on your program, Colonel Raina, Tilak Deveshwar, and the brilliant Air Marshal Bedi, who has taught me so much about our Air Force. And so I think a lot of insights have been gained. But I think what I would like to say is, we need to step back a little bit, if you like, theoretically and historically. I would say this is nothing new for us as Indians, should be absolutely nothing new for us to do, because I was writing the introduction to the great polymath Binoy Sarkar's writings last month in December. It's now published in India, and I had to reread some of his accounts of India in the ancient period, and I refresh my mind with Kautilya. So nothing I'm going to say is going to be unfamiliar to anybody who has read Kautilya. And basically, what Kautilya argued long before international relations was even a subject was that we live in a system of warfare. Peace is the exception. So we should always consider that warfare will come upon us, and often unexpectedly. So we should have no illusions about how the international system functions. I say international system because if you say society, it begins to imply some degree of cooperation, amity, which does, of course, exist, but it occurs in the context of constant warfare. There are no friends, there are no rules. Everything is up for grabs. So that's the first thing, that we should recognize warfare is the norm and nothing has changed. It depends a little bit on the structure of power in the system, how the balance of power exists at any given point in time. Now, if you take the Cold War, there was a high degree of stasis, inaction, and freezing because it was bipolar. All the subsidiary conflicts happened on the periphery, and these were not serious. Once a bipolar power structure broke after 91 and was pretty much complete in the next 4 or 5 years, inevitably the United States sought to establish its role as the sole dominant power. And all the promises it made to Mikhail Gorbachev were, of course, purely for consumption. And Mikhail Gorbachev, shockingly for a Russian who are very astute geopolitically, bought it and complained, but you promised. So the Americans have sought to establish their dominion. In 2001, the neocons, particularly Wolfowitz, Wesley Clark, and a few others, talked about changing regimes in 7 countries. So this was the pattern to be established. And unavoidably, they sought to consolidate in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is very, very important. It is what Halford Mackinder in the early 20th century, 1904, I think it was, described as the geographical pivot of history, stretching from Eastern Europe right to the Yangtze, Arctic. But this was the pivot of history. That those who controlled this Eurasian heartland would rule the world, and the periphery would be subsidiary. Countries like Japan, the United Kingdom are on the periphery. Now, Halford Mackinder's perception, if you like, has been superseded somewhat by history and circumstance. He talked about land and sea power pretty much exclusively, but that has been supplemented significantly by technology. You can reach out into other countries by myriad technological means, and we are witnessing this now in the Israel-Iran spat. We are seeing this in Ukraine. So, however, I think a whole generation of American strategists have been brought up on Halford Mackinder. So Russia was always going to be a target for them, always going to be a target for them. And bringing NATO to the Russian border in Ukraine would have changed the equation significantly because Russia blocked their attempts at regime change in Syria. That was one of the 7 on the list. Iraq ended in failure. Now, what would Ukraine do? Now, Ukraine and Lithuania have a somewhat similar position close to the Russian border, but Ukraine would have done something unique. If you were to park your nuclear missiles near the border with Ukraine, it would give the Russians 7 minutes warning before the missile hit Moscow. Now, that gives them about 5 minutes warning time. And their detection is inferior to that of the United States. And what the underlying threat would have been that we will strike at you preemptively before you can launch against us. And we'll destroy most of your land-based missiles and perhaps most of them in the sea. And the rest of your missiles, when they're launched, will be caught by our ABMs. So we now have superiority in nuclear deterrence, and you better understand that. Now, obviously, this was not a completely realistic proposition because so many things can go wrong. But it was going to be a threat to make the Russians think again, for example, in the Middle East. So this was the threat the Russians were not prepared to accept. And if you know anything about what happened to Russia between 1941 and 45, and I have been a student of this battlefield, basically the Germans wanted not to conquer Russia, they wanted to annihilate them. They wanted to liquidate the Russian people biologically. And they were doing that on a massive scale, not just in the concentration camps. Virtually no Russian prisoner of war, or 2.5 million, survived to come back. So the Russians are very, very sensitive to anything happening on their western border. And that history, of course, goes back much, much longer, goes back to the 14th century Napoleon, and we could go on and on. And every time, every single time, the Russians have prevailed. And it was at very high cost in 1945 that they prevailed. So they were not going to accept that. But the Americans were going to give it a try very simply because the manpower was going to be Ukrainian. Ukrainian lives matter not one bit to the Americans. They couldn't care less. They are now pushing the Ukrainians to mobilize everybody over 25. They're doing that right now. So they're going to send more into the meat grinder because the Russians are not advancing very fast because they have taken care of Ukrainian missile defenses against aircraft. That was the key to the movement. Once they took care of that, they could bombard them, not just with glide bombs, but with their usual bombers. And by October, it'll be over, my guess. Anyway, so why is it of interest to us? Because India was the second target after Russia. India was going to be the next target. So we have a big stake in the outcome of the conflict in the Ukraine. Why is India a target? People should understand that India has always posed a problem for the West and NATO. It liked to do its own thing. They often did it badly, they often got it wrong, but they did not easily take advice. Only in 62, Nehru got a fright and he invited the Americans to come and save them. And in fact, he wrote the letter in the morning, and in the evening, the Chinese had called a ceasefire. So he would have been saved the humiliation if he had saved the second letter on that day for a few more hours. In fact, India even declined to accept American urgings when the Americans demanded that we stop buying Iranian oil. I think this was in 2011. In fact, I know from the senior official who told me that the Indians said to the Americans, and I find that quite astonishing, we will comply with Security Council resolutions, not your unilateral ones. So they refused. But of course, subsequently, the Americans held a gun to India's head, and India did comply and stop buying Iranian oil. But we have not been a vassal. And the United States only likes to deal with the vassals. The UK is a vassal, Canada is a vassal, and Germany is also a vassal, and Japan is also a vassal. And if there is any doubt of that, look at the punishment and suffering they're willing to undergo to comply with the demands of Jake Sullivan and Blinken over Ukraine. Two very unmemorable policymakers in the scheme of things. And the punishment the UK has taken, I live here, so I see daily incredible punishment. It has destroyed the government. They will lose the next election, partly because of that. The Germans have lost a swathe of industry because German industry really depended on cheap Russian energy supplies. So they have taken a real beating. Some of this actually, quite amusingly, has gone to the United States. They've transferred. Every country has bowed and done what they're told. India did not. They caused a lot of anger by continuing to buy Russian oil because without Indian purchases, Russia would have been in some financial difficulty. Basically, Chinese and Russian purchases, Indian purchases of Russian oil kept them going. And we very cheerfully said to the world, we buy where it is cheapest because it suits us. Now, that is not how a vassal behaves. So, the United States has never given up this ambition to turn India into a vassal. Now, this is where the game becomes much more complicated than many Indians understand. We all know that the Seventh Fleet came to the Indian Ocean in 1971 and threatened us. It was the motivation for us to go nuclear. That was why in 74 we went nuclear. Now, most people don't know, but I had the misfortune to have helped as a young student in the leading Naxalite English language journal of India from Calcutta called Frontier. I used to go back every holiday to help edit that because it was owned and edited by my much loved uncle, who was a great modernist poet. He simply was barking up the wrong tree. I did not share his views, but out of affection for him, I would go and help him. I met a lot of these Naxalites, not Kanu Sanyal or some of the Rally, but many others. It was very clear to me. By 72, the Naxalite movement had been infiltrated by the CIA. Simply because the Naxalites did whatever the Chinese told them. On once Sino-American rapprochement occurred, they coordinated the use of Naxalites against Mrs. Gandhi. This was payback for Bangladesh. Of course, this was destroyed. Actually, by two people who are not remembered. One was the IGP of police, Ranjit Gupta, who was actually a family friend. Ranjit Gupta, Inspector General of Police. How shall I put it? He's gone now. He was a mean man. He took no prisoners. And the other one was actually General Jacob, whom Mrs. Gandhi had ordered into Calcutta. And he had said, "No, madam, this is not something I'd like to do." And she ordered him to go. And he was a dear friend of mine until he passed away. And he put the Indian Army, he asked for 3 divisions. He put them in strategic places. So it was crushed the only way it could have been. 5,000 casualties at least. What people don't know, a significant number, in fact, the majority of the casualties was CPM, not CPML. Because the Americans were not stupid. They also wanted to undermine the communist movement. And the Chinese also thought the CPM were revisionists. So there were all sorts of overlapping interests going in. But basically, they wanted to give Mrs. Gandhi a hard time. And she overcame that. And then, of course, the economic crisis hit and she collapsed. Now, I would like to say something which most people won't agree with, particularly my friends in the Hindutva movement. She was entrapped into the emergency. That court judgment for using vehicles is laughable as an issue. Our court system is also not lacking, not completely reliable. She was entrapped. And I also suspect her murder had something to do with this guard being brainwashed in his village. So there we are. Now, there are two things on which I disagree with all my friends, and I keep saying people repeat this, and I am somebody who has worked on this all my life now. The so-called left in India is a left only in name. There's nothing left about them. If these people had been operating in Joseph Stalin's Russia, they would have been taken out and shot as unpatriotic, not as bad communists. They would have been shot as unpatriotic, all of them. So there is no left. This left has been totally infiltrated since they were imprisoned by the British in the 40s, 1940s. Many of the leaders of the Bengal communists had served time under the British. In fact, their leader, Sri Jyoti Basu, is to come and hide in my great grandfather's house, which the police did not raid because he was a friend of the Governor General. So all of these people were potentially compromised. There was dirt on them. The Indian Intelligence Service also was very close to the British. They continued collaborating right the way through, even now. In fact, some of this happened behind Nehru's back. Sardar Patel did not share everything with him, and they certainly kept Krishna Menon out of the loop. Our first director of the IB was very pro-British, and the reason why the British preferred Nehru to Patel was because they thought Patel, though he was anti-communist, was very clear-headed and very sensitive to national interests, whereas Nehru could be manipulated, particularly by Edwina Mountbatten, which she did very successfully because he was sharing in 1956 lists of India's defense purchases with her over the phone. So India has always been a problem. The Indian left has been always manipulated. So what is the utility of the left to the West? The West does not intend to invade India. Because invade India means, apart from the Indian army being quite formidable, it will unite the country. That is what we don't have now. We do not have a united country. We have a very deeply divided society. So what they do is this. Where they can give us a hard time militarily, Northeast, Khalistans since the 80s, and with the Naxalite movements. These are all very deeply infiltrated, deeply. This is There are local grievances. Absolutely. It is exactly like Nepal. There were many local grievances, but the Maoist movement was taken over by the evangelists in Nepal with the cooperation of our people in Delhi. Because we also had a problem with King Kananda. So I'm trying to illustrate the degree to which foreign interference in India is huge. So the left is useful for only one reason, because they are a thorn in the side of any government in Delhi. The key is to have a weak government in Delhi. That is what they want. A weak government is what they consider will be pliable. And anybody who gives this government a hard time, that's why you see no criticism of what has happened in West Bengal, Sandesh Khali. You see nothing in the British press, nothing about it, because these people are a real thorn in the side of the government in Delhi. It is really not about Modi at all. They are totally indifferent to Modi. They couldn't care less about Narendra Modi. They will treat him like Saddam Hussein, who was their great friend when he was waging war against Iran, and he was unceremoniously disposed of. What they worry about, the fact that Modi has done one very crucial thing, and that alarms them. Yes, India's development is something they're watching with great interest, but I don't think they're against India's economic development. What they're worried about is what he's done in UP as a shape of things to come. He has broken the caste vote bank. They know in order to have their government in Delhi, you need a united Muslim vote, which is what we've seen in Karnataka, and you need caste vote banks, which is exactly what Rahul Gandhi is trying to achieve. And this is not something he thought of. This is something thought of by top Indian academics in the United States. I could name the universities, but I won't. And by intelligence services. They have understood that India's Achilles heel are caste vote banks of the kind we have in Bihar. UP, they are now very astonished that what has this horrible man done to make people vote for governance and not caste? So this is the key issue. How do you restore? That is why you will never see any adverse reporting on Muslim activity in India, terrorism, nothing. You will not see, because Muslims are their only vote bank. And this is a standard thing imperial powers do. They find a minority rule over you. That is why for a long time they tolerated Assad in Syria. Because Assad actually was not a lot of trouble to the Israelis. Assad's father, Hafizul Assad, also was not a lot of trouble to Israel. He was not a lot of trouble. But the Russian presence, because they wanted to block the Russian and the Black Sea and all Mediterranean coastal access, which they could get from Syria. So that is why they wanted Assad. And Assad, who was a terrible, terrible ruler, an absolutely intolerable torture of the worst kind, they had to fight for Assad because that is their alternative route to the Mediterranean. That is the region from which. Now, the French implanted their Christians in Lebanon, and the British put a border around some oil wells and called it Kuwait. Without Kuwait, Iraq is not a viable state. Their water supplies are controlled by Turkey, the Tigris and Euphrates, and their own coastline is 56 kilometers. Kuwait is their sole access to the ocean. That is why Iraq is not viable, and it will collapse in the next 20 years completely, because their water problem is insoluble and they have mismanaged it on top. Now, this is the issue we need to bear in mind, that in order for India to be subjugated, it has to be through internal subversion. And the internal subversion to have political substance has to be a united Muslim vote, which actually my arithmetic tells me is not 13-14%. It's nearer 23-24%, not because we've got the numbers wrong, though we have got it wrong. Some people will say it's 17%, but because if you have 90% voting and they don't split their votes, the impact rises by about 7% compared to a Hindu vote of 62, 60, 65%. So if they vote 90% and don't split their votes, the impact is about 24%. So after you've got 24%, if it's a disciplined vote, you can organize a caste constituency. It's possible. Surely in Tamil Nadu, possibly in Bihar, but UP was the big loss for the West. UP is a big problem because this is somewhat unexpected to all of us. That even SP people, after Ram Mandir, were abusing their own party. So Modi is a problem because of what he has done in UP, most of all. They don't mind that India is growing and doing well. They have some issues with specific policies, like we want uh, social media information of the big players like Google stored in India, that they don't like. They don't like UPI. They hate it, and they are having to adopt a variant of that in the United States. But the big card companies have made sure it is hindered various ways so that the card companies don't have, because the card companies will basically die because they cannot do interpersonal transactions. So UPI they hate, but the world is going to adopt UPI because it's a technical innovation which you cannot beat. It is far too good. They also don't like various other things like us making weapons and selling them. All of these things offend them. But they are not opposed to Indian economic development per se. They just want a different government to be in charge of India. That is it. And they think this is achievable. And the way the conversations have been going in the last 3-4 days, I think many of us feared it might be. So I suspect, even with a smaller majority, the incumbent NDA will come back. Hopefully, they will have at least 365, which actually gives them a two-third majority. So this is the issue. How do you take control of India to, in effect, achieve regime change, which they did in Ukraine? And this, if you read about American history, they've done everywhere around the world. This is standard practice. Now, India is the big prize. India has been a big prize for 1,000 years. To a lot of people, India's wealth is huge. And I don't mean gold, though that is large enough. The manpower wealth means these people are producers. So India is worth having a handle on, and they are not going to give up easily. Now, I was just reading a book by a leading Cambridge academic. I forget his name. I think it's Duncan. He wrote a fabulous book, a much praised book on the Anglosphere, going back to the late 19th century. And there was a huge discussion between some of the leading thinkers of the time that the world should be ruled by the Anglo-Saxon people. It was the Anglosphere. That they were the natural rulers. H.G. Wells was part of that. Some leading Americans like Carnegie were part of this. Now, of course, this did not fly because of the Russian Revolution or Chinese Revolution, but this feeling about how the world is to be run has not died out. They still think it is achievable, and England is a vassal, and everything it does is what the Americans tell them to do. Everything. They have no autonomy at all. Ditto for the Canadian. They are basically US proxy. All this Khalistani stuff people think is Trudeau. Poor man. He has room for maneuver. He does what he's told. Khalistan is a very big lever against India because Punjab is a border state. It has many issues that we cannot ignore. And, determined terrorists can cause mayhem by killing and assassination. They can cause mayhem. And they know that Khalistanis can be used potentially for this kind of activity. And they have socialized and brainwashed enough people to find assassins and killers. And my fear was such a man would make an attempt on the lives of our leaders today to create another mayhem in India. They would use a Khalistani to attack one of our leaders. Now, fortunately for us, history is not completely on the side of our adversaries. We have had some very good discussions on, actually, with one of your um, rivals, I think, though I think she may not be a rival, on Smita's program, or General Rajiv Shukla. General Rajiv Shukla, I think his name is. Shukla, yeah.
Raj
And
Shukla. Raj Shukla.
Raj Shukla, and they were very good, by the way, very good, very, very well informed. And this intelligence officer.
Hani Bakshi.
Sorry? Not Hani Bakshi, another one. There are two of them. Hani is one, there's another one. Now, they were brilliant on the
Yeah,
Hamas.
Pavitra.
Yeah, that's yeah. Now, he pointed out something very important. For the first time in American history, their interest payment of debt is higher than their defense spending. America as a society is also deeply, deeply divided. By 2030, 45% of women will be unmarried and childless. This is an impending demographic catastrophe. I'm afraid this demographic catastrophe is happening in China, Russia, Japan, Italy. India is not yet experienced that, but in 30 years' time, India will also enter this phase. It is happening to large segments of the Indian population which are going to disappear. For example, the Bengali Bradlok and the Tam Brahms will disappear because the demographic catastrophe has already finished them off. You can already predict how many people from this category will be alive in 40 years' time because a huge swathe of their women are not marrying, particularly in Bengali middle class, and virtually no one is having more than one child. The replacement ratio is 2.2. So the Americans are in a lot of trouble. They have a window of opportunity. What they're doing is to play a game of chicken, which is why they have now handed over these missiles to potentially attack the Kerch bridge, the bridge connecting Crimea to the mainland. The Russians will immediately retaliate by destroying the bridge on the Dnieper River. And their entire army will be stranded east of the Dnieper River. They will not have any way of supply. The Russians did not do that earlier because they did not want to provoke an attack on the Kerch Bridge. So they did not. But if they attack the Kerch Bridge, which will be of no meaning because Russian supplies are coming by sea and by rail now. So that will, but it will be apparently a prestige blow to Putin, but it will have no military significance. Now, why I'm saying all this is because the Americans took a chance to see, of course, game theoretic textbooks don't tell you what happens when the game of chicken fails and one party fails to move out of the way. This is not something to do with nuclear weapons, but that is exactly what they're doing. This is the activity of an overrated schoolboy prefect. This is not what serious people do. Anyway, now, um, Adi, I've been speaking without allowing you to interrupt. Please don't
No, no, no.
allow
This
me.
is fascinating, sir, because you're basically opening out the dirty, dark secrets of the past. This is amazing. As a matter of fact, I was about to request you that let's focus this episode on the dirty, dark secrets that you were talking about. Some of the stuff that you've told us, of course, those of us who are reading quite a bit would know. But a lot of the things that you've told us already would be quite shocking to a lot of people. So this is really amazing because it could set a base for our audience for a future discussion on how India should actually handle this stuff, knowing what we do. So I'm
Now,
actually, I mean, I'm really, really astonished at a lot of. I mean, I'm really amazed with the kind of knowledge that you're sharing with us, and I'd really appreciate if you continue with the history part. And probably in the next week we could do another show where we talk about the current geopolitics and handling that. So it's going to be
Adi,
really fun. I'm really enjoying
Adi, you don't
myself.
want to drive away your viewers, so let's think about it
No,
again.
I am enjoying myself. Trust you me, sir. This is a conversation I like to have actually, and my even
So,
my audience as well.
no, so this key thing which people in India keep going on about the left, I said, please, for God's sake, this is not the left. These people behave like foreign agents because otherwise they could not survive. Now, I speak about this with a great deal of reading and knowledge going back many, many years. And coming from Calcutta, I knew the left. And this revered uncle of mine who got it completely wrong had a bevy of people from Ram Guha to Gautam Navlaka visiting him. And I met them in his house. All of these people used to come to him. Now, the other thing, related thing I want to say to people, I heard again people moaning about the Western media, how much misreporting there is. The, the system in the UK and the United States and Germany, these are systems organized for war. Dominant powers are organized for war, and all their national resources are involved in this game. Some of the top universities directly survive on arms contracts and research, like Stanford, MIT. Huge amounts of money go from the DRDO. Universities and media are not controlled hour by hour, day by day, week by week by the government authorities. College heads in the United Kingdom, Oxford and Cambridge in particular, their names are cleared with Downing Street. And once you have the top man that you choose, you can dictate who is recruited. You see, they've just recruited a woman from the London School of Economics, my alma mater. I've resigned, I've retired, and she has just got a very prestigious chair and become fellow of All Souls College. You should just look at her Wikipedia entry to see. Her name is Alpa Shah. Just look at her Wikipedia entry to see the degree of hostility, uh, lack of scholarship against India. Now, all this is not an accident. These things happen with a purpose. So the media here is only doing what the government wants it to do. They are not being instructed in any way, but the editor is meeting cabinet ministers in clubs in London. They went to Oxford together. They went to Cambridge together. They even played rugby in Eton and Harrow together. They all know each other. They marry each other. So you don't have to have any crude line of communication, do this, do that. They know what to do. I'll give you one small example. The High Commissioner of India invited me to a talk given by my former contemporary LSC, Maliha Lodhi, in the Royal Institute of Interactive Affairs. She and I were contemporaries. Um, I will tell you something about her in private, not in public. And she was giving a talk, and there was that woman from NDTV. What's her name? I forget. Neha, whatever her name is. Uh, she was totally unequal to her because Malia is a serious player. And the High Commission said, "You come because you can ask questions." And the former editor of The Economist was chairing the meeting, and he caught sight of me and he let everybody speak but me. He refused. I got up ceremoniously, made a bit of a noise, and I walked out. He would not let me speak. So this is how it operates. Everybody knows what they're doing. The Washington Post, New York Times, they're all part of the system. So don't get het up that the media is. This is all part of government policy to undermine the government of Narendra Modi and demoralize. And please, there was a time when Bajpayee got equal, if not more, abuse from the same people. So it's not like Narendra Modi is the first. They do not like people like Bajpayee nuclear test. That really got their goat because they can't understand how India managed to fool them. That was quite an operation, but India managed to keep it secret. So anyway, this is why I want to add something which is happening now lately, and I've argued against it in writing, and I think I've convinced some people, but not everybody. People are talking about Hindu phobia. Please, there is no Hindu phobia in the West. I've lived in the UK for almost 55 years. There is no such thing as Hindu phobia. Hindu phobia means that people have an irrational fear of Hindus. That is what it means. And therefore, a dislike. Ordinary people may be ignorant, they may be indifferent, but they are not fearful of Hindus. They might even find it quite entertaining. They like Diwali. They are not afraid of Hindus. There is no Hindu phobia here or in the United States or anywhere in Europe. People are not afraid of Hindus. Fear, you talk about Islam. And that is not phobia because it is well grounded on experience. I missed that bomb in Edgware Road in 2005. I decided to walk from Marylebone to Edgware rather than hop on the train. I would have been on the train in 2005. So I have a vivid recollection. So people are afraid of Muslims partly because of statistical discrimination, because they don't know who's going to plant the bomb, but they are not afraid of Hindus. There is no hatred. The hostility towards Hindus is actually directed against the government of India. They want to delegitimize India by saying you come from a culture which is unworthy, which is racist. That is why their trump card is caste. Caste has been a trump card since the beginning of the 18th century. Please, to my friends, read the literature. Read some of the doctorates from King's College London. You can download them for free. Caste is their trump card. This is what divides India and delegitimizes because they say caste is race. They tried in 2001 in Durban to pass a UN resolution that equating race and caste, and Atal Bihari Vajpayee managed to fend that off. They're trying to do that in England right now. It is on the statute from 2010, and actually, me and my friends are fighting against it right now. In these coming weeks, we will carry on this fight. Caste is their trump card. So, this is not something ordinary people feel. It is sponsored at the highest levels because if you give up on caste, what do you curse India for? That they have noisy festivals, that they wear the sindoor and the shakha, they wear a sari. Caste is an incredible, powerful information, and we know that the whole issue of caste is a fraudulent one. It was invented in 1871 in a serious way with the first census, and all of this is in the work of Nicholas Dirks, the president of Berkeley. All this, and Cohen from the late Professor Cohen from Chicago. Dirks was a student. Now, so I would say to people, please do not demonize ordinary British and American people and get their backs up. If you call them Hindu-phobic, they will become Hindu-phobic. You have to win them over. You see, and the worst thing about screaming Hindu-phobia, which actually originated with a Pakistani. There is a Pakistani chap, a totally suspect fellow, Akbar Ahmed, who's a student in Cambridge with my late company, Dr. Aadi, the historian of Tibet. Then he went on to become High Commissioner in London, professor in Harvard. His books are laughable. He invented Islamophobia. And this is where I'm afraid Rajiv Malhotra got the idea. They have that, and we will have it. The only thing you do by saying Hinduphobia is you legitimize Islamophobia. And once you legitimize Islamophobia, you will not dictate what its content should be. They will dictate. And do you know what its content is in many borough councils in England, including where I live? Council has passed an injunction proposed by a Hindu Gujarati councillor that to say minorities are persecuted in Muslim majority countries is not permissible. You cannot say that. Yes. You cannot say violence in Israel and Kashmir is terrorism. This is the resolution. It's been adopted by several councils, Harrow, Oxford. Now, once you say Hinduphobia, they will say Islamophobia. And Islamophobia actually is a brilliant tactic, which most people don't understand. It is backdoor entry for blasphemy. This is backdoor entry for blasphemy, that you forbid all criticism of Islam, because that will be blasphemous. And Islamophobia is a vehicle, and we Hindus foolishly, by propagating Hinduphobia, are legitimizing what they are trying to do. We should be very cautious. Now, I noticed one of the top people here who's fighting for Hindus has suddenly stopped fighting Hinduphobia. She calls it Hindu hatred, Hindu miasma. So this is, again, a part of the large panorama of attempts to disempower. Now, the other thing I'm afraid I should repeat over here, so people in India know, and some do, some of my friends have always maintained this, and I've never disputed, a very high proportion of Hindu groups working here are infiltrated by the intelligence services. And I'll give you one reason why this is true. And I've worked with many of them. I've worked with most of them at some point. The top one refuses to provide an agenda of their meetings with the government ministers. And these leaders are nominated by the government. The Hindu organization leaders are nominated by the government in the United States and the United Kingdom. So be very careful. Do not fall for anything you hear. And when I said this to a friend of mine, I said, don't believe anybody. If that includes me, I'm okay with it. If you do not believe me as well, I'm okay with it too. Because you should be very wary. And I know a top agent has infiltrated our government, a top agent. I've explained that to my raw friends. A top agent has infiltrated our government. And in a maneuver that can be only described as brilliant. But there's some of us who keep a very watchful eye. And I worked out how this was done, and I informed senior raw people about it. So, what is it that we need to do in India? First of all, in the next month, we need to re-elect Narendra Modi. Without that, it is catastrophe. It's not because Modi is a nice guy or the best thing since sliced bread. I don't know. I've met him a few times. I thought when I met him, once alone, 15 minutes, what was impressive about him for me was he was very focused. He didn't make idle conversation. And I understand this is the experience of people working with him, that it doesn't make idle conversation. So we need Narendra Modi. And I say Narendra Modi more than anyone else, because he is the person orchestrating the show. I know the show is complicated and everything doesn't work out because it is too complicated, too large, and we have many institutions which hinder what you want to do. not least our court system. But I study this academically, objectively, and I take no prisoners. And on the whole, I think many things which are considered terrible compromises by Narendra Modi, I regard these as tactical maneuvers. Two steps forward, one step backward. For example, people say, look at the number of corrupt people who have been inducted to the party. Frankly, some of them I'd like to shoot personally. However, if these are the people Indian voters want to elect, what should Narendra Modi do? These are the people who have been made electable by the Indian electorate, so you have to deal with them. But do notice something very important. Many of these people whom one would not wish to have no role in the BJP and government. They have no role. They fade away quietly. So you recruit them in a tactical maneuver, and then they disappear quietly, or they have very modest impact. This is realpolitik. What else can you do? People are asking me something about Bengal, which I know very well. Why has he not called President's rule? I've been reading so many social media posts. If you call President's rule in Bengal, forget about what the Supreme Court will do. Forget about that. There'll be riots across West Bengal. There'll be riots in the street of Calcutta. There'll be looting. This is not something the government wishes to countenance right now. It is not something they would wish to do. And I would be totally opposed to it. Yes, the people of Bengal are paying a heavy price. But bide your time. Bide your time. Bengal is very important because it has become the sieve through which even Pakistanis are entering India from the border. These are not all Bangladeshis. And even our dear friend Shashi Tharoor says there are 30 million of in India today. We don't know the real numbers. Now, we have to wait. This is why Modi has absolutely refused, and correctly, in my view, to use force in the Punjab. So that's exactly what they want him to do. They want Modi's to shed blood. They want to say he is like the Congress party. And as it just happens by accident of history,
Incite violence. I'm sorry, I'm going to interject here. Incite violence. You've literally hit the nail on the head, sir. There
and
is
he's
just
not going to fall
no
for it.
question.
He's too smart. He's too smart. He's not going to fall for it. And
And
there
Modi
is
ji's
another
game is
supplementary
something very
reason.
simple. He handles stuff like an elastic, sir. He'll keep pulling it, pulling it, pulling it, pulling it till the time it reaches its own capacity and snaps on its own self. So
The other thing, I agree with that completely. I agree with that. I mean, actually, I'm marveling a little bit at this man's tactical brilliance. Again, you don't get everything right because you can't. That's not
you can't.
possible. But the
Absolutely.
thing about Modi, and I keep telling my Sikh friends, and I have many dear Sikh friends, but all of them have a problem with Hinduism. Somewhere deep down there is an issue with them. This is very tragic, because we belong to two overlapping sampradayas. I always say to people, we are multiple sampradayas and they all overlap. We are the freest people on earth because the biggest freedom you can grant is for people to imagine their own divinity. That is what we allow. You imagine your own divinity, you portray and depict your own divinity. Now, um, excuse me one moment. Sorry, that was the putting the laptop on power. You see, I keep telling my friends, and by now people should have worked this out without any help. Modi is the most pro-Sikh prime minister we've ever had, and this is not because of politics. I think he's a true believer, like me, and I think like you. The Sikhism is in our blood. Sikhs may be 2% of the population, but the ideology of Sikhism, the lifestyle, and their gurus, all Hindus have Sikhism in their blood. None of us, all of us have Jainism in our blood. When we want to be truly good human beings, where do we look for an example? We look towards Jains. They have given an example before the Vedas. Same as with Buddha. If you want to boast about your capacity for intellectual logic, read Buddhist writings. So all of us together, and Modi actually is somebody who embodies all of these different views of life. And I'm grateful that now in my old age, I'm learning from our Prime Minister about the basics. that we were deprived of going to missionary schools and etc. Now, we will hit 7 trillion, I'm confident. If you grow at 8%, you triple in 14 years. At 8%, you triple in 14 years. If we can do 7%, that's possible, very possible. I think we will cross 7 trillion by 2032. We'll cross. I think the arithmetic is clear. We have one thing in our favor. We have three of the best economists in the world guiding government policy. Our CA, Anantha Nageshwaran, Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Dr. Vivek Debroy, and the third person, which you will not know, is a legendary Finance Secretary, Somnathan.
Okay.
Outstanding man. And he and Anant have written a book together with Madhusudan, a fabulous book on derivatives, which even foreign universities use. So these guys are serious players. And Vivek, whom I've known for a very, very long time, since the 70s, is one of the few polymaths I've met in my lifetime, polymath geniuses I've met in my lifetime. So Modi has terrific advice on the economy. He has a great foreign minister. All he needs is for the Indian people to unite behind him and hold their breath for a little while. Give him another 5 years, and you won't believe what you can see. And I will perhaps conclude by saying one thing, which I have now told my friends in Ashoka Road to think about. If I'm getting a freebie, free transport, 1,000 rupees in the bank for women in Bengal, all sorts of freebies, a lot of it is leaking. It is not coming to me. Between the promise and what is delivered, there's a big gap. And we all know that. And Indians are not stupid. They know that. And their experience is taught them. But I say to all of you, each 1,000 rupees you take away in freebies, you are taking away from investment which is for your grandchildren. This infrastructure surge that we've had, this is not for you and me, really. We will be partial beneficiaries. Yes, we are benefiting somewhat, but the real beneficiaries will be our grandchildren. Yeah. And if we are not going to worry about our grandchildren, what are we here for? So if you're in your 50s and 60s, think not just for your children, because the children are the people who will be the inheritors of this legacy called India that you, with your suffering, in the last 30 years, have managed to deliver. But your grandchildren will be the beneficiary. For the first time in our history, in a very long time, your grandchildren will be secure. And I always conclude by saying one thing, of all the things that have happened in our foreign policy, we can feel a bit proud and even arrogant about the successes we've had. Infrastructure, you don't have to explain to people. Just look at the data, what we have achieved in infrastructure, from digitization to roads, airports, everything. But you know what, for me personally, is the most satisfying? This incredible trick Modi has pulled off. That he has reached out to the deprived and poor with real goods, from water to electricity to subsidized gas to pakka ghar, Sauchalaya, bank accounts. Now this, even his critics are saying, is the most socialist government we've had. Now this dimension is really the real Modi. Modi, in his heart of hearts, cares about the poor. I think he cares less about the rest of us, but he sure as hell cares about the vast majority of people who are poor. And people are saying inheritance tax. क्या होगा? कुछ नहीं होने वाला है. Inheritance tax कुछ नहीं होने वाला. कोई भी नहीं करने वाला है. Because 2.5% of people pay tax in India. 2.5%. The rest don't have anything that you can tax. Of the 2.5%, I would say 1.5 own a house. That is their principal asset. 77% of assets of Indian households are in a house, 7% in gold, and some durables. So you're going to take away houses from 1.5% of the population to redistribute. First of all, the total amount you generate will be nothing. You try and tax the big boys. They're about what, 500 less, I think. The real big boys, they will all move to UAE and re-register their companies. That's what's happened. 70% of millionaires fleeing India have gone to Dubai to escape Indian taxes, which is why the Indian government has reduced the 180 days that you can visit without global taxation on your income to 90 days. So that's where they'll all go. Dubai will welcome them with open arms. Who will say no to Adani, Ambani, Mahindra? They will go away, and all you will collect from them is corporate taxes, nothing else. And you will lose their expertise, their skill. I say, okay, I can think of criticisms of Ambani, but who has given us the cheapest 5G in the world? Who has made tens of thousands of equity owners better off? India has relatively few billionaires compared to the big seven in the United States. We say we are too focused on a few. America has seven big companies which control the Nasdaq and the S&P index. So be a little bit forgiving towards ourselves. We are not all bad, but most of all, go out and vote for Narendra Modi, and you will be pleased with the outcome that you will see on so many levels. Thank you for listening to me.
Sir, I'm absolutely amazed. Thank you so much. Fantastic. And I know why I've been trying to chase you for a while, and I'm going to do that even more, because these kind of conversations need to reach out to the people. What you've told us about some dirty dark secrets, if I may, and those are things that people don't know about, and they must know about when they're taking a judgment for their future.
Can I
So
just
that's
add one
something.
dirty secret I
Yeah,
forgot to tell you about? Um, I have it on very reliable authority. Kanishka was taken down by the CIA.
yeah, that.
They trained the chaps who came from Pakistan in Langley. They were trained in Langley and sent to Canada. And the Canadian government pretty much knew something big was going to happen.
Yeah.
Taking down aircraft is no big deal, the CIA. So Kanishka is a work, and this has been imparted to me by somebody who knows. So be very wary. We have to deal with everybody. We have to be nice to everybody
Oh
until we
yeah.
hit 10 trillion.
Oh yes,
But
sir.
be wary and be united.
I've been saying this, sir, that we've gone through three regime changes without people realizing and without throwing a victim card. We've had terrorism sponsored by some of the biggest this thing. Even now, the State Department does sponsor certain elements and certain NGOs that support Pakistani agencies and stuff like that. So we have a tough challenge, and people don't like. And I say this with all humility: a dirty brown country growing up. So we're gonna fight, and this fight is gonna be very interesting, and we will win. There's just no question, sir. Thank you so much for the encouragement, sir. I will look forward for our next session where we talk about today's geopolitics. I'm sure you'll be able to throw a lot more light at from what we know. It's always a
Adi,
pleasure
thank you very much.
interacting with
Thank
you.
you for your audience.
Thank you, sir.